What's up, guys? Hope this is working. How's everybody doing today? Looks like we're good. I'm starting to figure this technology thing out. Or am I? What's up, guys? Looks like we're good. Cool. So, guys, today's coaching call, I want to go over something that, I haven't gone over a ton with you guys, but it's super, super important. It's something that took me a long time to learn, over the course of my career. And I made a long list of these things, like these little X factors that you have to check for, right? Anytime you're going to buy a deal. And we would always do it, in our company. However, I haven't really gone into a deep dive training about these things with you guys. And so that absolutely needs to happen. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So this isn't like, what's the cash flow? What's the ARV? What's the equity? All that kind of stuff. This is X factors. These are like weird little things that you don't think about, but you need to check for before you buy any deal. It's super, super important to do that. Cool. All right, so let's dive into what these X factors are, okay? First of all, guys, this list of deal killers that I have here for you, it was hard earned, okay? I lost money buying houses, that had these things, and it took me, I really learned from the school of hard knocks on what not to do. A lot of beginners, they just look at the numbers and they're like, dude, this is an awesome deal. I'm going to buy this house. And that's literally as far as they take it. And so my goal is to make sure that you go beyond that, because expert real estate investors, they look at a lot of different stuff and their heads work in a different way. And a lot of times they can't really, put it into words why they're thinking what they're thinking, but they'll pass on a deal. A lot of the stuff we're going to go over in this list are some of the reasons why they pass on deals. Okay. There's a lot more to consider to make sure your deal is airtight than just the numbers. Also, guys, don't get overwhelmed. I just want you to, once we're done here, just make a list of these things we go over. I'll show all of them to you in one list at the end. Okay. So you don't have to worry about like taking crazy notes the whole time if you just want a list of them. But it's going to be your job just to go through this list each time you're going to buy a property and make sure that everything's airtight. Okay. Make sure that your property either doesn't have any of these deal killers, or if it does, then you have to adjust your expectations, adjust the amount of rent you're going to get, or your vacancy rate, or your equity that you think you're going to have, ARV. I'll talk about all that. Not all of these mean that you cannot buy the house. A couple of them pretty much do mean that you shouldn't buy the house, but most of them just mean you need to really take that into consideration when you're running your numbers. Okay. Now, the first one is foundation issues. This is a bit more of a well-known one. I mean, obviously you're not going to buy a house if it has foundation issues. The reason I put it on here is a lot of people don't really check for this. Maybe it doesn't come up, and we know when they go look at the house or whatever, or it's not super bad yet or whatever, but somehow me and many other investors, especially beginners, will end up buying houses that have foundation issues. Okay. And foundation issues are not an absolute deal killer, but they are one of the most serious violators of this whole thing. Okay. You have to make sure that your contractor goes and looks at the foundation whenever they're doing their, estimate for you. Okay. Now, contractors are not foundation experts. However, you need as many opinions as you can get. So you make sure your contractor looks at the foundation and tells you their opinion. You're also going to make sure that your inspector looks at the foundation. Inspectors are a little bit more thorough when it comes to this. They're going to be crawling under the house. They're going to be checking all the joists and things that run underneath the house, the wood beams that hold the thing up, any piers in there, which is like a concrete block that props up against the joist, right? They're going to be checking all that kind of stuff out. They're going to be looking for saggy floors and cracks on the outside of the house. And so you want to make sure your inspector looks at it as well and get their opinion. Now, if any issues arise, whether you see it or your contractor sees it or your inspector sees it, you need to go ahead and pay a structural engineer to come over and certify this house before you buy it. Now that could cost $500, $600, $700, okay, to get a structural engineer to write a letter that certifies that this house is structurally sound, okay? But you can't buy the house if it has foundation issues and you don't understand them, unless you have an expert of that level come in and tell you what's up, okay? I've done this before. I've had inspectors tell me that, Brian, there's something going on with this foundation. I think you need to get it checked out. And then I just didn't listen to them, and I didn't get the structural engineer, even though they told me to. And guess what? It was a $10,000 or $15,000 mistake. Foundation issues, pretty much made the deal like not cash flow by the time I had to put that much extra money into it. I really wish I would have spent that $500, got the structural engineer over there. They would have told me not to buy it, right? So run for the hills. Run for the hills if you are not willing to do this. Just find another deal. And that might not be the worst idea ever, because there's plenty of deals out there that don't have foundation issues. You don't have to buy the one that does. Like I said before, foundation issues, what they look like, the floors will be wavy, saggy, uneven. There'll be cracks in the foundation. There'll be settling in the walls, okay? So like when the foundation of the house actually sinks into the dirt, obviously the walls are on top of that. So they're going to sink down and they're actually going to separate from the ceiling. There can be separation. There can be separation along the door frames and stuff like that. So you got to look at all that, but your contractors and inspectors are going to look at it too. All right, let's hop on to the second X factor. The second X factor, guys, is drainage issues, okay? Drainage issues are a big deal and drainage issues are linked to foundation issues. In fact, a lot of foundation issues are caused by poor drainage, okay? So when you're buying a house, you need to figure out like, okay, when it rains really hard here, what happens basically? Where does the water go? All right. And there's a few things you want to look at. First of all, are your gutters properly draining? Gutters can be the cause of drainage issues. If your gutters have a bunch of leaves in them or something like that, or if when they come down the side of the house and then they stick out, is the water actually being directed away from the house, or is it just pooling up at the base of the house? That's super important. And it's worth getting the gutters cleaned, or some houses don't even have gutters. You got to get them added. It's like $1,500. It's worth it. Okay. And then you look at the slant of the lot. How is the lot slanting? Like if this is the front wall of the house, okay, like it's obviously straight up. And then if the dirt is slanting down to that wall, when it rains, where do you think the water is going to go? It all goes right. It runs right down against the wall of the house, against the foundation. And it makes the dirt really wet, and the dirt actually sinks. Okay. And that's one of the main causes of settling in foundations, which leads to the cracking and all the problems and stuff, is that water has just been draining against that foundation for so many years when it could have easily been avoided. So if the lot is slanting towards the house, especially if you live somewhere where it rains all the time, like that's a big issue. Is water collecting under the house? Okay. And, I've actually gone and looked at houses when we've had really big rainstorms in Nashville. I've driven around and looked at the yard and looked at where the water was going and see if it was pooled up anywhere while it was raining, because that's the best indication of like what's going to happen, right? So you'd want to go and see, is there any water pooling up under the house? That should come back in your inspection, and that absolutely has to be dealt with. Where does the water pool up when it rains? And then drains and gutters, guys, can usually fix this stuff, but you can't just buy a house and ignore it. So if you have like that slanted lot that's going towards the wall of the house, you've got to get like a French drain installed. Okay. They basically dig like a small ditch, and then they'll put a pipe down in that ditch. They will drill holes in the pipe so that water can get in it. And then they'll fill it in with rocks so that the water can go through the rocks into that pipe. And then the pipe directs outward. Okay. So if like this is the wall of the house, the pipe runs the whole length and then around the house, right? So it would direct it away from the foundation. That's the whole point of like a French drain. And those things can cost a few $1,000. They're not necessarily cheap to put in, but doing that plus putting the gutters in, that will fix a drainage problem. Then you won't have a foundation problem. And when you're running your numbers on a house, if it has these issues, then that obviously is part of your rehab budget. Okay. So you have to budget gutters, French drain, all that stuff. Your numbers still have to work with you fixing these things. Has to be addressed ASAP. All right. So let's move on to the third X factor, flood zones. Okay. You have to ensure that your property is not in a flood zone. Now, this is one I would just not violate. Like if your property is in a flood zone, just buy another house because it's problematic. First of all, flood insurance is really high. Okay. Flood insurance can be like $400 a month. Okay. Like crazy expensive. When the big flood happened in Nashville, like it destroyed so many houses, right? And a lot of these people did not have flood insurance. And then when all of it settled down, flood insurance is like, well, we'll insure these houses for $400 a month. I mean, that's all of your cash flow, right? So that's like ruins the deal completely. Don't be a sucker that buys a flood zone house. People will send out deals and not tell you that it's in a flood zone. And you'll be like, man, why is this property so cheap and nobody wants it? And then you go over there and there's like a line of mold like on the side of the house and it's all the same level all the way across. That's because the water used to be right there where that line is up against the house. And, it could come back, right? And so flood zones are typically in areas where like the ground just kind of dips. Like if you're buying houses in a neighborhood that's pretty hilly, if there's like a valley where it's at the very bottom, that's where all the water is going to go when it rains. So I kind of like buying houses that are up on the hill, not down at the bottom of like a valley. It's not an actual valley, like mountain valley. I'm talking about like a miniature version of one. If the house is the lowest house in the area, that's where the water goes. And that's where the flood zones are going to be. Again, these houses are often really cheap. It's just not worth taking on the risk of that flood coming back. And you can basically just either the software that we use will show the flood zones in the areas that we invest in. So you can click like flood zone overlay and it'll show where it is. You could also just call your zoning office. Okay. Zoning office, that's going to be a number that you need to have for some of these other X factors as well. They'll be able to tell you whether or not things are in a flood zone. That's probably the best way to do it. All right. Number 4 is sewer and utility easements. Okay. Sewer and utility easements are like, obviously there's a sewer system that runs through cities, right? That gets rid of all the waste and stuff. And they laid that down like before a lot of the houses were built. Okay. And for some people, those sewers are actually running underneath their house, underneath or in their front yard or in their backyard or something like that. Okay. And it's helpful to know if you're one of those people for a few reasons. First of all, it will make it difficult to ever sell your house for land value. When we used to wholesale, we'd try to flip a property to a developer to tear it down and build a new house. And then they would find out there's a sewer easement in the front yard and they can't build over it. Okay. Because it needs to be accessible. So the house would have to be back from the easement so much that they couldn't build a very big house on that lot. And so, it just limits what you can do. Like one of the sexy things about being a real estate investor is occasionally you're going to buy a house that like the neighborhood blows up and everything, new construction just takes off and you can sell that house for land value and make a bunch of money. I've done it a few times. Okay. But you can't do that if there's sewer and utility type easements running through your yard. So again, it's worth that call to the zoning office. Just say, is there any type of easement that, affects this lot that this house is on? If the city ever needs to work on the sewer, they're going to need access to the yard. They're going to have to dig up a part of your yard to get to that sewer. Okay. So again, it's not ideal. Best to generally avoid it, especially if you think that like this house could be in an area that's going to blow up and the lot will be worth a lot one day. Your zoning office will tell you if you have a sewer easement or not. All right, let's move on to number 5, guys. This is historic districts. This is one that affected us a decent amount in Nashville. It may or may not affect you guys that much, but I'm guessing that some of you are investing in markets that have historic neighborhoods. Okay. A historic neighborhood is just a neighborhood that the, county or whatever, the city has decided to preserve because it's got character and history, right? A lot of the houses are like cute and they have cool looking windows where they're just designed really intricately and stuff like that. And they add character to a neighborhood or a city, right? So they just decided they'll do this historical overlay where they're like, this whole area, we're going to keep the houses similar to how they are to maintain the character of the city. They do it to prevent like builders from coming in and just tearing down all the houses in that area and building ugly boxes or something and just ruining the character. Okay. So that's what a historic district is. And they're kind of hard to deal with. The historic association or whatever they call them, they make the rules on like what you can do when you rehab a house. Okay. They'll be like, no, you can't take that window out. You have to leave the doors. You can't tear down this wall. You have to leave like the architecture of the roof and stuff like that. And so you can imagine trying to deal with them would not be a lot of fun. You also can never tear down these historic houses, right? So like, again, you couldn't ever leverage the value of the land because the house has to remain by law. And then there's a thing called contributing versus non-contributing. So they might do like an overlay for a whole neighborhood and be like, this area is in the historic district, but some of the houses are contributing to the historic district and some are not. And what that basically means is some of the houses are actually cool and have character and other ones are ugly and they don't care what you do with them. Okay. Even though they're both within the historic district area. So you find out, is my house contributing or non-contributing? If you have a little square box that doesn't have any character, it's probably not contributing to the historic district. You can do whatever you want. But if you have a cool, like old Victorian with a nice front porch with a rail that looks like it was designed in the 1890s, that's probably contributing and you're not going to be able to do anything with that. Okay. So that's number 5, historic districts. The number 6 X factor you need to look out for is streams. Okay. I'm talking about a stream that's running through the yard of the house that you're going to buy. Even if it's like this wide, tiny little stream, doesn't matter. Okay. Because it's an important thing. Streams running through the yard will increase your flood risk, first of all. Okay. It's just water, lots of water that's basically right near your house. Okay. And then when it rains, what's going to happen? That stream's going to pool up and become a small river, right? If it got really bad. And ask me how I know. We've had streams like basically turn into an entire yard of water that's up to your knees, right? Because one time, a bunch of trash built up where the stream was running and it got dammed up and the whole backyard flooded. Just little stupid stuff like that can happen when you have a stream running through the yard. So that's going to devalue the house. It's not cool. I mean, I guess like if you have a huge lot and you have a farmhouse with a bunch of acres, it'd be cool to have a stream. But like the rentals that we're going to buy are on little lots and streams are not like a positive thing. Okay. Streams will require drainage or redirecting of the streams if it rains a lot. So you could actually have to pay people to come in and redirect that stream or dig it deeper or something like that. It costs a lot of money because it's a specialty thing. So just generally, if you can avoid it. Like getting back to the drainage and the foundation issues, this is linked to that. Water screws up houses. Okay. So you want to be away from water. It's kind of linked to the reason why I don't like to invest near the beach because there's too much damn water there. Okay. Let's talk about number 7, power lines and electrical towers. Okay. This is another one that a lot of people may overlook, and I have many times. So power lines running through the yard will devalue the house. Now, like every house has power lines running around it, right? I can look behind me. I see power lines. I see power lines over there. There's probably some in the front. Okay. But it's not the big, ugly kind. Okay. And it's not excessive. So there is sort of like a judgment thing when it comes to this. Those huge like metal towers that have like the really thick power lines that look like they are like the mainstay that powers the whole city. Those are the worst kind. Okay. And some houses will just have like a thicket of power lines like running in front of it. And it's just an eyesore. It's like, whoa, but every house is going to have some power lines. Those aren't the ones I'm talking about. I'm talking like excessive ones, really big ones where it's actually an issue. Okay. That's going to devalue the house. It's going to lower the, appetite of the tenants that want to rent it. And then electrical towers, the big ones I mentioned, those are a huge eyesore. Okay. A lot of people think that they give you cancer or they put off radiation. I have no idea whether or not that's true. But, if you're just imagine yourself as a tenant wanting to rent a house, right? Are you going to rent a house where there's a massive electrical tower, like one lot over from where the house is? Or are you just going to find somewhere else? I mean, shit, it's just a rental. Why not just keep looking, right? And then if you went to sell it one day, somebody may not want to buy that because they don't want to permanently live right near a big electrical tower that might be putting off radiation. Okay. So as you can see, just the house itself is not the only concern when you're buying a house. You got to look all around the area and see what's going on. All right. That's number 7. Oh yeah. Electrical towers and power lines, they also act as an easement. Okay. Which means no building near the easement. Again, if you never wanted to tear the house down and build up something new, you can't build if the power lines are running right here, you have to put a buffer of 25 feet. Most lots are only 50 feet long in the first place. So it eats up all of the space where you can build. Actually, lots are more 100 feet long, but still, that's still a big chunk. All right, guys, X factor number 8, railroad tracks. Okay. Railroad tracks are something I've dealt with personally multiple times because East Nashville, where I used to buy a lot of houses, has a lot of trains running through there, and it definitely affects your investment. Okay. Railroad tracks just are going to make the property less appealing, like a lot of the other things we talked about. If you picture yourself being a tenant and you're going to look at a house and you're walking through and you're like, man, this house is cool. And then all of a sudden you hear a train horn in the distance and it gets louder and louder and louder. And they have to pull the horn when they're at a crossroads or whatever, because to let people know that might be walking by. And then the walls start vibrating in the house and it actually vibrates and rumbles. What do you think that tenant's going to do? They're probably just going to go and find somewhere else to rent, right? I bought a house on the railroad tracks, right across the street from railroad tracks long time ago. And it's definitely been, an issue when it comes to getting it rented, and the tenants are concerned about it. They have to wear earplugs and stuff when they sleep, so it's certainly not ideal. It increases noise. Railroad tracks are also kind of an eyesore. They just don't look good, especially when the train's going by. And then crossing railroad tracks is difficult or dangerous, especially for tenants that have kids, that kind of thing. You're just going to be scared. Your kids are out playing in the front yard and there's a big train going by, 1 block over. It's certainly not ideal. Okay. So when you're looking at properties that are near railroad tracks, you have to factor this in. X factor number 9 is interstates. Okay. Similar to railroad tracks. Interstates, meaning highways, meaning have you ever been driving through a neighborhood and then it's sort of dead ends and it's a bunch of houses on a street that are backed up to an interstate, even if it's an on-ramp or one of those big concrete walls with cars on the other side flying by. It's noisy. Okay. So interstates are not ideal. They're noisy. They're a big eyesore. And it can be seen as a positive because of the accessibility. It is nice to live near an interstate because you can be on the on-ramp within 3 to 5 minutes of leaving your driveway, but not if it's super close to the house. Okay. There's an interstate 3 blocks this way from me. So it's actually really convenient, but I don't hear it or see it at all. I'm just far enough away to where it's out of sight, out of mind. Okay. So it's an advantage for me, but if that thing was 2 blocks closer this way, it would be a disadvantage because it's too close. Okay. And one thing I learned when I was kind of cutting my teeth as a new investor is that how close something is to you really matters. If the railroad tracks is right there, it's bad. But if it's 3 or 4 blocks away, it's fine all of a sudden. Interstate right there is bad. Interstate 3 or 4 blocks away is fine. Same with an electrical tower, a lot of these other things, right? So you really have to think about that. And, it does make a difference. Okay. So basically, don't buy a house that backs up directly to an interstate if you can. Cool. Let's talk about number 10, topography. Okay. Or topo for short. It stands for the slant of the lot itself. Okay. If you ever seen a house that's like, way up a really steep hill to get to the house, that's some crazy topography. Sometimes the topography will go up and then flatten, and and the lot just has like a lot of dimension to it. Okay. That might look cool, but it's really not ideal when it comes to buying a house. Okay. If it's slanted too steep up towards the house itself, it's going to be a turnoff to potential tenants and buyers, especially the ones that have kids. They don't want a really steep driveway where their kids are going to be flying down it on their big wheels and busting their chins open like I used to do. And then, if it's slanted towards the house, it's going to be a flood risk like we covered earlier, right? If the house is like the wall is here and the topography slants inward towards the house, it's going to be a flood risk. And that's not what you want. Okay. So in general, you want to look for flat lots that are slightly elevated, but not slanted. Okay. So if I'm looking at the ideal house, the actual lot that it's on is really flat. I'm going to shut this because I think I'm getting some glare here. 1 second. There we go. That's better. Okay. So the ideal house, you're looking at it, it is on a flat lot. All right. Like literally as flat as possible, but it's also kind of higher up than some of the other houses in the neighborhood. All right. And that's to avoid flooding. So if it rains, the water is going to actually run off of your lot and down to those other houses. Okay. But you want the lot itself to be really flat. If it's slanted, there's just more risk of like shifting and settling and, water pooling up. And again, if you're a tenant, right, or a buyer, if you ever wanted to flip this house, aren't you going to want a flat yard that's like easy to walk up to? Your kids can play ball inside of the yard. Your kids can't play in a yard that's slanted really steep. Okay. So you want flat lots. You want the topography to be very uninteresting and flat. And if it's not, then that is an X factor. Okay. All right. Number 11, commercial stuff. This is a big one. Okay. And this one's pretty common. And what I mean by commercial is like any commercial business or establishment, right? Because we're buying residential properties, but there's going to be commercial stuff that's in the area, and that's what you're looking for. Okay. Houses near commercial, that's a bad thing when the commercial stuff is ugly and it's not useful. Okay. Picture like just a big dirt lot full of like bulldozers. Or one time we bought a house and it was like there was this field like 2 houses over where they're storing all these old school buses, right? It just looks like crap. Things like gas stations and convenience stores, that can be a negative if they're kind of run down and grungy looking, like the ones that you wouldn't want to go to at midnight, right? That's a negative type of commercial thing. What else would be negative? Just something that's not really useful to the person. Okay. So like businesses that are not useful, like a warehouse where they're doing work. So these are private companies. It's not like a commercial place that the tenant could actually visit. Okay. It's just there and it's just ugly. And you wish that there were houses there. That stuff's going to take away from the value of your house. It's also going to reduce the amount that you can rent it for. Okay. Houses near commercial stuff. I meant to write positive right here. Okay. So houses near commercial are positive when it's like restaurants, coffee shops, breweries, little boutique stores. Okay. I notice I put boutique because it's not like Walmart is not necessarily a selling factor, walking to Walmart, right? Like there's going to be too much like people there and traffic and stuff, but walking to like little shops where you can buy trinkets and things like that, or restaurants, coffee shop, breweries, like those are all really positive. Me and my wife love living. We live in an area right now that's walkable to several restaurants, a bar, a brewery, a co-working space, and stuff like that. So that's a positive, right? And those are the kind of commercial things that you want, but you don't want to buy, a house that's right down the street from like a auto dealership or something. That's not something somebody needs very often. Okay. It's not actually a positive for them to live near that. Okay. So if you're going to buy a house, that's near commercial stuff, I would recommend reducing what you think it's worth by 10%, reduce the rent you think it's going to bring in by 10 to 15%. You always have to adjust your expectations when this stuff is around. Okay. All right, we're on to number 12, and this is the last one, although I did think of one while we're doing this, so I'll talk about that one next. There's actually 13, unlucky number 13. But number 12 is busy streets, okay? So that's just like a street, where it's like an arterial street is what they call them. Arterial streets are the ones that people use to get around. Denver is full of arterial streets. Like every fourth street is this one-way, fast-moving street. Like this, every fourth street it'll go this way, and 4 more streets there'll be one going that way, and it's how people get around. But I used to live on one of them, and you're just hearing cars zooming by all the time. I remember seeing like a dog get loose one time, and I was scared as hell and ran after it because I thought I was going to get run over because the street's so busy, and kids, are trying to play on the street. It doesn't really work. But it's not just those one-way busy streets. Like we have a street right here where it's 4 lanes and there's no turning lane and there's wrecks all the time and stuff like that. And it's not ideal to have rentals on streets like that for a lot of reasons. Okay. First of all, they're going to lose some of their value and some of their rent. Just like I said, with being near commercial stuff. If you're near a busy street, you have to adjust your expectations. One of my first mentors taught me to take 10% off what you think it will rent for and what you think it will sell for if it's on a busy street or if it's right near a busy street. It's just going to be less appealing to the tenants. There's noise, there's traffic, there's danger to kids and pets and all that kind of stuff. Okay. So like I said, take 10% off your assumptions. Okay. So these are all the X factors we've gone over, guys. Foundation issues, drainage issues, flood zones, sewer and utility easements, staying away from historic districts and streams, power lines, the railroad tracks, the interstates, what does that say? My screen's covering it. Anyways, let me go back and I've got topography on here twice. My bad. All right, there we go. Interstates, topography, commercial, and busy streets. Okay. There's one more I want to put on here real quick, just to make sure I cover everything. And that would be number 13. We'll call it bad neighbors. Okay. This is another one that a lot of people don't think about. I didn't make a slide for it, but I want to make sure to cover it. So like if you are considering buying a house, you really want to go over there and like walk out the front door, walk to the street or to the sidewalk, turn and look in this direction, look at your neighbor, look across the street, turn and look in this direction, look at that house. What do you see? Like they call that curb appeal of the house, and it's important. Are you going to want to rent a house if the guys to this side have like 3 junker cars in the front yard? The guys to this side have some like scary looking dogs inside of a chain link fence that are barking all the time. The guys across the street have trash in the front yard and a boarded up, window on their house or, something like that. Even if you have a pristine property, it is definitely affected by the street. Like I've had friends like that personally lived on a street move because they don't like their street, right? Streets really matter. Okay. So I really should title that bad neighbors / curb appeal. Okay. That's a super, super important factor to consider when you're buying a house is what is the feel of the neighborhood. Okay. So some people might go, they get a deal and they're like, yeah, the numbers work. And we got the contractor over there and we checked it out and everything's cool. But they went over there on like a Tuesday morning and everyone was gone or asleep, right? And they didn't go check it on a Saturday afternoon when the weather's nice and everyone's out. And then you see, well, what is it like? You know, are people like walking all over the street and walking through yards, and kids riding their bikes through your front yard, and, you know, dogs running around and stuff like that? Is that what the neighborhood is like when it's buzzing and when it's active? Because if it is, you know, who's going to want to live there? Like, I bought a condo in Murfreesboro, Tennessee one time, and everything seemed fine. And then we started getting tenants in there, and they were like, dude, this area is dangerous. You know, it's shady. And we heard gunshots. And I'm like, I never heard any of that stuff. Right. But I didn't experience the area like, you know, fully. I didn't actually hang out there for any length of time. I should have probably thrown a mattress on the floor and spent a week there or something. It's not really an option when you don't own the house, obviously, but you know, you need to know what that neighborhood feels like all 7 days of the week. Okay. It needs to just stay pretty calm, pretty quiet, pretty chill. Ideally, or again, you're going to have to deal with higher vacancies, lower quality tenants, less rent, all that kind of stuff. So like the street value, or, you know, like street appeal, curb appeal, the quality of your neighbors and stuff like that, which neighbors can change. Sometimes bad neighbors leave, better ones come, you know, but like, you know, you got to really factor that in. Okay. So super, super important. So guys, what I want you to do is make a list of all these things that we've gone over. Okay. Screenshot this or whatever. And then whenever you are considering a house, I want you to go down this list and just check them off. Most of the time, you're going to be like, no foundation issues. Yeah, we need to put new gutters, not flood zone, no easements, not historic, no stream, no power line, no railroad track, no interstate. Lot's fine. You know, there is some commercial stuff down the street, so we'll deduct 10%. It's not on a busy street. There's, you know, one bad neighbor. We'll deduct another 2% for him or whatever. But like, I just want to make sure you're weighing these things in to your decision, like numerically, okay? Like a savvy investor would. You don't just go, it's going to be fine. You deduct 10 or 15%, you know, for each one of these things that you have, okay? You really, and then and sometimes you just say, you know what, there's too many of these things. I'm just going to find another deal. Like if you are struggling or you're trying to stretch to justify buying something, then, you know, you're probably just need to move on to another deal. Cool. All right. I'm about to move to the next slide. So screenshot that if you need to. This will be on a replay though, right here and in the course. Let's talk about how to avoid overwhelm, because I'm sure some of you are like, dude, I'm just still trying to pick my market. I'm just still trying to like build my team. I'm trying to learn how to analyze deals just in terms of like rent and ARV. And now you're telling me I got to worry about 13 other X factors, Brian. This is great. Okay. So here's how to digest all that and deal with it. First of all, leverage the knowledge of local experts. Okay. This is what I've been telling you guys so much. Building your team of experts is how you're going to become an expert and make good decisions in your market. You need to have a Rolodex of people you can call, like your contractors, your inspectors, your zoning officers, your flood zone guy, your structural engineer, et cetera. You know, like we know structural engineers, flood experts, historic district people. Like we have all the phone numbers for all those people in our market, and we'll spot check deals before we buy it. So, you know, I don't want to like super overwhelm you guys, but this shouldn't take more than, as long as, you know, you don't have something big come up, it shouldn't take more than an hour or so to like eliminate all these X factors from your potential deal or adjust your numbers so you can buy it. All right. But you need to find these experts. And again, go to your local market, get on Facebook, join all the groups and post, be like, hey, you know, who's a great structural engineer? What's the number for the historic district? How do I know if a property's in a flood zone or not? Right. It's different for every market. So I wish I could there was one way I could teach it for everyone. But unfortunately, the nature of real estate investing is we're all investing in different cities and they all do things differently, but they're all going to have these same things going on. You just got to figure out how to get this information in your city. The software we use will tell us the flood zone, tell us the topography, tell us if it's in a historic district, all within just logging in. So some of that we can use, we can get just from our software. But if you have phone numbers and people to call, you guys are good. Okay. So that is, none of these are deal killers. None of the stuff we've gone over are absolute deal killers. Okay. Some are worse than others for sure. Like a foundation issue is definitely worse than being near a train track, right? Train tracks are just like, yeah, might have a little bit more difficulty finding a tenant and might have to take $50 less a month in rent. Foundation issues could mean 10 to 20 grand in extra repairs. It could mean like the deal being ruined and you losing money, right? So some of these are worse than others for sure. For some of them, just deduct 10 to 15% from your assumed ARV and rent and move forward and be a disciplined investor and make your offer based upon that. Let the seller know why you deducted 10%. It's just, look, it's right near an interstate, so I know I'm going to have more trouble renting it. As an investor, there's always a price that works, right? There's always a price where you're like, well, shit, if they'd give it to me for 50 grand, of course I'd do the deal, but they want 80, right? Well, you need to offer 50. Okay. I know that sucks, but it's just like the nature of being an investor. Okay. So you are doing math problems when you're coming up with offers. You're always like just doing a math problem and trying to figure it out. Okay. And so but the thing is it's not super straightforward, right? Because you have to factor in like railroad tracks to your math problem. So I'm telling you how to do it. Just take 10% off, 15% off if you want to be conservative. And then if it's also near an interstate, you better take another 10% off. Okay. So eventually you can see if you have enough X factors, you're going to have to get the deal for really cheap for it to make sense. But that's the truth. Okay. If it's a house that has a lot of issues, you do need to get it for really cheap. And you can still actually make it be a great deal. A house that near railroad tracks might be a ripoff at 60 grand, but at 40 grand, it might be one of the best cash flow deals you ever bought. Okay. And you're just adjusting for that factor. So for some, like I said, you deduct 10 or 15%. For other stuff, the issue has to be addressed before you can buy. Okay. Like it has to be, it's an emergency. Okay. Like flood zones, I'm just telling you right out of the gate, just don't buy a house in the flood zone. Just don't do it. Okay. And if there's foundation issues, you better have, gone the full length with your inspection, and you have a structural guy over there. Maybe you get a couple quotes from a couple foundation companies that tell you how much they'll charge to fix it for, because those companies will give you like 10-year warranties on the foundation, where if anything goes wrong, they'll fix it for free, stuff like that. Okay. And so you have to like have resolved your foundation issue. Like, okay, I figured it out. It's going to take this amount of money and this is what's wrong. Or otherwise you just move on and just avoid flood zones entirely. Okay. But all the other ones, like none of them are absolute deal killers. Okay. They're just more or less like you got to take 10% off. Okay. Cool. I'm going to get a drink of water and let me know what questions you guys have about this or anything. I'm willing to hang out for a couple more minutes, but definitely type your questions in the box if anything has popped up for you guys. And yeah, we'll get it done. These X factors are something that I really wish I would have known. Really wish I would have known about these things right out of the gate. I know in this coaching call, we probably, gone a little bit over the top in terms of detail and getting really granular. But this is how a disciplined investor looks at a deal. Okay. Disciplined investors really look at the deal, as granularly as possible. They consider it from every single angle. They nerd out. Okay. But then once they figure out that, everything's cool, they relax, buy the deal, move on to the next one. Okay. So when someone brings me a deal, okay, you realize all the stuff we just went over, right? If you didn't watch the whole thing, go back and watch it from the beginning. When someone brings me a deal and they're like, Brian, this rent's for $850. I can get it for $70,000. Is this a good deal? I'm like, on paper it is, but I need to get a lot of other questions answered before I can really tell you a resounding yes, this is definitely a deal. Make sense, guys? Cool. So if you guys are watching this later tonight, for those of you who are watching it, or tomorrow or whenever, and you have questions that pop up, type them in the comments, just tag me, and I'll definitely get back to you ASAP. And guys, I'm here for you. Let me know what you need. You know, let's get you your first rental. I promise getting your first one under your belt will open your eyes. You might think like you need me 100% right now to do this, but when you buy your first house, you're going to be like, okay, I only have a few questions for that Brian guy now because I've kind of seen the process. And guess what happens when you buy your second one? You're done. You don't need coaching anymore. You could actually teach someone how to buy rentals. You realize that if you have like 1 or 2 rentals, people will look up to you and be like, dude, this guy, he knows how to buy rentals. Like he's done it before. Okay. Seeing the process, doing the process once yourself is literally like all it takes. That's the meat of this. Okay. So I really encourage you guys, stop being interested in real estate investing and get committed to real estate investing. Being interested just means you're dabbling. Commitment means you are going to find a way, even if it kills you. Okay. Only the committed win. Only the committed survive. Okay. So you guys got to be committed and just know that I'm here for you. If you don't know what to do, you got to ask. Okay. Because we don't know what you need unless you ask us for something. And then whenever we tell you, you got to go take action, even though you're going to be scared. You guys can do this. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you soon. Peace.